Lumen offers two different things to help motivate the innies to stay in line and to do their work. One of those things is their incentive program, which includes a finger trap. The other is a dark room with your supervisor and repeating the same phrase over and over again. One of those is insultingly cheap, and the other one is just psychological torture. If you haven't seen Severance, or if you're currently watching it, go ahead and skedoodle because there's going to be some spoilers I want to talk about. The incentives that Lumen offers its innies is absolutely insulting. Within the first two episodes, we get some insight into what some of the incentives are that Lumen offers. And there are 4 different stages that when a refiner gets, they get different prizes. At 10%, they get some pencil erasers. At 25%, they get some finger traps. At 75%, they get a music/dance experience. And at 100%, they get a caricature portrait. But there is another thing that they offer as an incentive within Lumen. And that's when one of the workers gets Refiner of the Quarter, where they're then rewarded with a waffle party, as well as a little individual gift of their choice. We learn that Dylan is actually on a streak of being Refiner of the Quarter, and the incentives do motivate Dylan to do his work and to do it well. He loves those waffle parties. Why does he like it so much? I don't know. It's a weird celebration where you get to go into the replica of Kier's house, eat some waffles, then you get to go lay on the bed and put on a mask of Kier, where there's a whip that has different virtues of Lumen. And then when Dylan gets all comfortable, there's a whole bunch of dancers that come in and start dancing, but they also have some really weird masks on. I don't know how that's an incentive. That's creepy. But not only is the waffle party creepy, but the incentives that come before that are just outright cheap and lame. I think the most exciting one is probably the music and dance experience, because when every single day is exactly the same, literally like Groundhog Day, the only difference is the numbers that you're putting into the files. A day where you get to dance and have some music go on at least sounds like a pretty good day. But still, that being the best incentive, the other ones, I just don't see the worth behind it. I mean, I'm not an innie, but if I just had to guess which refiner was the best refiner based off of the amount of incentives they've earned, I would have to say Dylan is probably the best refiner. We all know that Mark is the main refiner and they're waiting for him to complete his file, but based merely on the amount of pencil erasers, finger traps, and caricatures that Dylan has earned, he has gone through several files. And if I remember correctly, Dylan actually started after Mark. So I'm curious to know how many incentives Mark has earned within his 3 years of being at Lumen, especially with knowing that he had his freshman flute, which earned him his little cube of the Allentown. And then we have Irving, who doesn't like the incentives at all. He misses the day where you just got a handshake and got told good job, like a boomer. What's worse than sitting in a dark room with your supervisor? Sitting in a dark room with your supervisor saying the same phrase over and over again, being gaslit into believing that you did something wrong. With the small amount of incentives that Lumen does have, I personally believe that those incentives don't do anything to keep the innies in line. I think it's the fear of going into the break room that truly keeps them in check. And when you really think about the experience of what goes on in the break room, it is truly a terrifying thing. So the innies are forced into this really long, dark, creepy hallway. And at the other end of the hallway is a door that's usually being opened by the supervisor in check. Sometimes it's Milchek, sometimes it's Cobell. And they take them into the room and they sit them down at a desk. On that desk are 2 hand imprints that the innie has to put their hands on. Where they put their hands ends up reading their heartbeats in different senses, which allows the supervisor in the break room to see whether or not the innie is being authentic with their apology. And the phrase they have to say is psychological torture. Let me read from my handy dandy notebook. Forgive me for the harm I have caused this world. None may atone for my actions but me, and only in me shall their stain live on. I am thankful to have been caught, my fall cut short by those with wizened hands. All I can be is sorry, and that is all that I am. And they say it over and over again until a supervisor sees that the innie is being authentic and genuine. Once the innie finally gets to the point to believing it themselves, is when they finally get to go back to work. And this process can sometimes take multiple days. The first time we see Helly go to the break room, she ends her day in the break room and goes home. And then within a blink of an eye for Helly, she's back at work, going right back to the break room to say it all over again for several hours. She ends up telling Mark that she said it over 1,000 times. I'm curious as to what else would get them into the break room. We know right off the bat trying to take any kind of notes outside of the severed floor is immediately punishable by break room. I'm curious to know what else the innies could do that would end them up down in the break room. Like, what if an innie doesn't finish their file on time? Is that punishable by break room? There's a rule where they have to acknowledge Egan, whether silently or out loud. What if they don't acknowledge Egan? Would that end them up in the break room? We know that the treatment of the innies is not good, which makes me wonder how strict they are with other things and sending them to the break room. And at what point does the person get sent to the wellness room with Miss Casey? And would Lumon fire an Audi because their innie isn't performing to what they need to be? Or would they just use the break room as a motivator to get the innie to do what they need to? With the incentives being what they are and the break room existing in the halls of Lumon, I don't feel like the incentives are doing much to motivate the workers. I think that Lumon is relying more on the fear of the break room to keep the workers in check, and then the incentives are like a, hey, good job, you're doing good. What are your thoughts on the incentives of Lumon versus the fear of the break room? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let me know.